Join the conversation in Tipperary. Contact us through Facebook, Twitter or email tiptoday@tippfm.com.
Now, welcome back to Tip Today, and Donal here for Fran. A couple of technical difficulties, getting a bit of feedback there, so we'll try and go back to John Halley at another time. But for now, we're going to move on to global news with Thomas Conway. Good morning, Thomas. How are you?
Good morning, Donal.
And tell me, Thomas, it must be I don't know, I suppose what's the term I'm looking for? There's too many things to choose from at the moment when we're looking at global news. It's like the old Chinese proverb of interesting times we're living in.
It certainly is. I'm just chatting with Andrew here in Clonmel about all the events and the shifting news stories. The rate at which the news cycle moves these days is extraordinary. But I suppose there is only really one place to start, and that is the Iran war. And I mean, the latest update, yesterday evening, US attacked and seized an Iranian cargo ship, the Tuska. This is the latest development in the Strait of Hormuz, or in the region of the Strait of Hormuz, in the Persian Gulf. And I think over the past couple of weeks, you know, we had two successive ceasefires. We obviously had the 2-week ceasefire between Iran and the US and Israel, which expires on Wednesday. There was a subsequent ceasefire in Lebanon, and that seemed to bring about, I think, a moment of opportunity. There was a little bit of momentum there, a sense that, particularly after the ceasefire in Lebanon, a sense that maybe a breakthrough could be made. But with these latest developments and the renewed hostilities and the subsequent closure of the Strait of Hormuz, I think there is a bit of a stasis. I think things are paralysed at the moment. There are supposed to be talks in Islamabad today. People are unsure if the Iranians are even going to attend that. So it is an extremely uncertain situation. And of course, we're all feeling the consequences in terms of price rises on the price of oil and gas. And I think there is room for a breakthrough, but I think it will depend on what happens over the next few days.
Yeah, the ceasefire due to expire on Wednesday night. They were hoping talks would start this evening, but is there even a chance of that happening at the moment, Thomas, with the newest standoff?
It depends largely on whether the Ukraine or the Iranians decide to attend and go to those talks in Islamabad. But you're correct to say, I mean, this latest standoff in the Gulf is extraordinary. I mean, Trump saying that the US effectively blew up the engine room of that Tuska vessel, and that would point to a level of renewed tension between both sides. Very difficult to see how they can then come together and try to engage in any sort of peace negotiations when this is happening at sea. Now, J.D. Vance has travelled to Pakistan, so the US has sent a delegation there.
Oh, right. I didn't know Vance was going again, but he has travelled, hasn't he?
Yeah, no, the word I have is that Vance is travelling or is going to travel over the course of today. There was a sense, I think, over the past few days that the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, had maybe gone out a little bit too quickly in suggesting that these talks would occur. He was reined in a little bit by forces in the Iranian regime, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. But, Trump has renewed his threats to, bomb, Iranian gas facilities and bridges.
Power plants and bridges, even though it is a clear breach of international law.
Yeah, so you would have to think the Iranians urgently need to come to the table or are anxious to come to the table. I mean, as you're correct to say, I mean, Trump has threatened war crimes, and those are... it's an appalling prospect that he would effectively rage, and the subsequent or the previous tweet that the civilization would die. I mean, those are shocking things coming out of a US president, but this is what we have become accustomed to over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I suppose there's two sides to this story as well. I don't think anyone could miss the irony of the Iranians calling the American attack on the ship yesterday an act of horrific international piracy, when, the whole problem is that they're attacking ships trying to travel through the Straits as well.
Yeah, and that must be said. And I mean, the Iranian regime, Iran has long been considered a rogue state in the Middle East. But I think what we've seen over the past couple of weeks, it has successfully used its leverage, which is the Strait of Hormuz. And by blocking that critical waterway, through which 20% of the world's seaborne crude oil travels, it can do enormous damage to the global economy. There are theories circulating that Iran is kind of emerging as a real power as a result of that. It seems to have discovered its main point of leverage, which is the Strait of Hormuz, and used it effectively. But, the irony is very evident. I mean, as I say, Iran long considered a rogue state. It sponsors proxies like Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. So there is a clear degree of irony there. But there is still no word in terms of the fate of Iran's nuclear program. I mean, there's supposed to be around 400 kg of highly enriched uranium somewhere underneath the mountains in the city, near the city of Isfahan. There's no word on whether that's retrievable. Trump refers to it as the nuclear dust. He has speculated that the US will go in and or that the Iranians are willing to give up that enriched uranium, that nuclear material.
Well, he says that, Thomas, but wasn't there a quote from someone high up, a spokesperson, saying that it's that the enriched uranium is as precious to them as the soil of Iran itself, or something like that?
Yeah, there have been words to that effect. And another point I would make, which has been made by a lot of experts on Iran, is you cannot unlearn what you have learned. So a lot of these Iranian scientists and that now have the capability to enrich uranium to a weapons-grade level, which would make it capable of producing a nuclear bomb. And you cannot unlearn that knowledge. You cannot simply bomb the program out of existence when that expertise is there. So look, I mean, it's in nobody's interest that Iran race for a bomb, but I think the incentive to do so has actually been increased by these US and Israeli attacks. Now, it's going to be, I mean, it's very much up in the air at the moment. The only one that's winning from the war is probably Russia, which has increased its oil revenues and revenues from gas and that.
But it had some of the US sanctions lifted.
Indeed. So, there are countries benefiting from this. China was said to have played a role in brokering those first set of talks. China is still somewhat of a bystander in this whole process. It's uncertain what will happen over the next few days, but once that ceasefire runs out on Wednesday or whenever that deadline expires, I think anything can happen when you have Donald Trump in power.
Yeah, I suppose and I haven't had a chance to do much of a deep dive on it, Thomas, but I know you've been looking at it. Where are the likely sticking points? Obviously, Iran doesn't want to give up the enriched uranium, and it's sort of a red line for Donald Trump that there can be no chance of them developing a nuclear weapon. What are the other sticking points that are likely to block negotiations going any further if they do sit down for talks?
I think, as we alluded to there, the future of the Strait of Hormuz is critical, and what type of management that will fall under in future. Iran has looked for kind of a set of protocols to govern maritime traffic travelling through that strait. It is essentially looked for itself and Oman, which sits across the Gulf from them and borders the strait, to be responsible for the flow of maritime traffic. That will not be acceptable to the United States, and I would expect much of the globe, because it allows Iran effectively to hold everyone else hostage. If it has control over the Strait of Hormuz entirely, we see its capability to paralyse the global economy. So that really, along with the nuclear program, is the main sticking point. But I mean, you can go back to the 2015 nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was negotiated by the Obama administration and Trump subsequently pulled out in 2018. I mean, that took around 20 months to negotiate. It only addressed the nuclear issue. It was specifically or exclusively the nuclear issue around which it tackled around the weapons program.
Nuclear program, we say. They denied that there was a weapons program. But yeah, go on.
Yeah. But when they're enriching uranium to such a high degree, you would have to suspect that manufacturing weapons is one of the objectives.
Well, it's the only objective for enriching it up to 60%. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. I mean, and I'm not a nuclear scientist, but, when you enrich uranium to that degree, I mean, everyone was suspicious of Iran. I think it was very clear whether they were heading or where they were heading. And, with an increasing number of countries with nuclear weapons at the moment, that will lead the drive towards nuclearization and will prompt other countries. I mean, if Iran were to attain a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia across the Gulf would almost certainly race for a bomb itself. Other countries in the Middle East would follow likewise. As it is at the moment, the only country with nuclear capability in the Middle East is Israel, and they're very quiet about their nuclear program. Very little is known about it. And so
but it's accepted, and we know that they do have the nuclear weapons, which is part of the reason that themselves and Iran are at each other's throats, and Iran wants the same, maybe not deterrent, but wants the same weapons. It's a mini arms race there. And you were mentioning that Trump's actions are potentially leading to another global nuclear arms race.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the chart in front of me here. Russia is the largest nuclear power as it stands. It's followed by the US, and then you've China, France, the UK. There's others: India, Pakistan, Israel. We mentioned there. The most interesting example really is North Korea, because I mean, Kim Jong-un, widely obviously regarded, I think, as a madman, a tyrant, really. Raced for a bomb and successfully manufactured nuclear weapons. It is a major deterrent for other countries. A country militarily will not touch North Korea now because it has that nuclear capability. And it is a guarantee of security. But we're living in a world now in which the traditional protocols and regulations and treaties have largely broken down. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1971 is in danger really of disintegrating because so many countries are racing for nuclear weapons. It is a very perilous world we're living in. And as war drags on in the Gulf, there are kind of even more reasons for Iran to seek a nuclear device, and its program might be somewhat smaller. It might be even more secretive than what we had previously known. But I suspect that in the future, unless there is some kind of binding agreement that allows Iran access to world markets and integrates it into the world economy, I suspect that many hardliners within the regime will be very intent on developing a nuclear capability.
Yeah, and I'm interested in this idea that with Trump disavowing the US's, I suppose, peacekeeper role or protective role in the world order and going America first and America only in a lot of cases, or Trump only if you want to be highly critical of him. But that's leaving people to say, well, if America isn't going to protect us and we don't have the backup of the threat of their nuclear arsenal, then we need one of our own.
Yeah, I think that's precisely it, because a lot of these countries, the likes of South Korea, Japan, European countries, would have existed under the American, or do exist under the American nuclear umbrella. America is effectively the guarantor of their security. And now with an increasingly unstable and unpredictable America, and with a capricious president in the White House, Donald Trump, the incentive to develop. We see with Europe, I mean, there are talks now that Germany will look to develop a nuclear capability. There is increasing militarization across Europe, and that's because we're living, and across the world really, and that's because we're living in a very unstable global environment. And nuclear weapons are as I say, effective in terms of creating a deterrent effect. They're a huge deterrent. Now, there is a doctrine called mutually assured destruction, which kind of states that, if somebody launches a nuclear strike, then there will be retaliation and that will lead to mass destruction. So the consequences, and, it's a very scary prospect. But you're correct to say that, yes, as America's security role diminishes, more countries will look to develop nuclear weapons of their own.
Okay, so we need to keep an eye on not only the issues between Israel and Iran, which have driven this whole problem, but keep an eye on who else is looking to develop nuclear weapons, as if we didn't have enough to worry about, Thomas.
Well, indeed, I know. And, you know, the topic we're going to talk about next, the Sudanese civil war, is an example of another conflict which is, you know, ravaging a part of Africa, a supposedly beautiful part of Africa, of the African continent. And, you know, you've all these wars going on across the globe. You've a race towards nuclear weapons. It's hugely worrying. It is. I mean, I was just chatting off air, and we were discussing to Andrew here. You know, it's extraordinary times we're living in. You know, it's very rare you would have a president of the United States. It's unprecedented to have a president of the United States acting in this manner. But it's really influencing the course of events across the world in many different theatres, from the Middle East to the Pacific to Europe. So it is hugely worrying. You're correct.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sudan there. That war, which isn't getting anywhere near the level of coverage Ukraine was getting, or obviously now the Middle East with Gaza and now Iran. But there's been a massive humanitarian crisis as a result of this civil war, which, as we say, is now into its fourth year.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, the third anniversary was last Wednesday. I have a figure here in front of me, 60,000 people killed. The reality is, I think it's impossible to estimate. It probably stretches up to 150,000 and beyond. And it's worth reminding people the kind of origins of this civil war. So essentially...
Absolutely. I was going to ask you to go through it because, like I say, it's getting very little coverage, and most people won't know a hell of a lot about what is happening there and how it all started. So would you take us through some of the main points?
Yeah, it evolved from a power struggle between two warring generals. One was the head of the Sudanese armed forces, General Burhan, and the other was a guy called Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, leader of a militia known as the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. And after the fall of Omar al-Bashir, who was kind of a long-time dictator, he ruled Sudan since the 1990s. He departed power in 2019. There was a power struggle between these two generals. It eventually escalated into a full-scale civil war in 2023. The RSF on one side managed to take command of kind of the western half of the country, the Darfur region, including the city of El Fasher. Now, there was an appalling massacre in El Fasher in which it's estimated that at least 6,000 people died over just a couple of days, according to the United Nations, and it is said to have borne the defining characteristics of genocide. So, you know, the RSF are responsible for appalling atrocities. On the other side, then, you have the Sudanese armed forces who retook control of Khartoum, the Sudanese capital. And Sudan is quite a big country geographically. Khartoum would be more to in the central plains or to the east. So the country is effectively split. It's not the first time. I mean, South Sudan seceded from Sudan in 2011. So the country has been split up before. It's a highly fractious civil war. It's very difficult to know where it will go from here. There's about 34 million people. That's about 2/3 of the Sudanese people need humanitarian assistance. So, you know, you can go into all sorts of shocking statistics. Famine ravaging parts of the country. People with severe acute malnutrition expected to increase to up to 800,000. So, you know, it is an awful situation. There is international intervention as well, or international influence. The UAE, and this is widely known, this isn't some sort of conspiracy theory, the UAE is long thought to be supporting one side, the RSF. The Sudanese armed forces on the other side are supposed to be sponsored, I suppose, or funded by Egypt. So the two rival powers are being backed by outside forces, and that is perpetuating the conflict on the ground. But, you know, it's probably fair to say it's bloodier than what we've seen in Gaza, and Gaza was absolutely appalling. It's probably a different type of war, but there are all sorts of war crimes and probably crimes against humanity going on.
Yeah, no, it sounds horrific over there, Thomas. I suppose, is there any prospect of peace deal? Is Trump going to go in and sort it all out?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, how many wars has he bragged about solving? 8.
Oh, it must be up to 20 or 30. Now.
Yeah, I would imagine it's in those in those figures. Yeah, it's a conflict that doesn't seem to have occupied the US's attention. I've heard very little commentary on it. You know, it's been described as an abandoned crisis. So it's not so much the world has forgotten about it. I think
that was from a UN official.
Yeah, that was from a UN official. I think because it's number one, it's quite complex. I mean, you know, I've outlined it there, and probably not very well, but you know, it's difficult enough to understand. The second thing is it's Africa, and I think people are almost fatigued by stories of war and sadness from Africa, and that shouldn't be the case. But I suppose Ukraine is closer to us. Gaza, you know, has a connection, or a lot of people will feel connected to Palestine. Sudan is far off. It's in the distance, and certainly it has fallen down the news agenda. It's hugely underreported. But I can't, you know, I wish I could proffer a solution, but I can't really see where this conflict is going. Hopefully it will be resolved, but you know, it will take a long time to rehabilitate Sudan, not only the people psychologically, but to rebuild the country as it stands, and there is going to have to be political stability for that to happen.
Yeah, resources-wise, Thomas, because, look, most of the time when we see wars, particularly in places like Africa, there are vast resources there that people are essentially fighting over. I believe there's diamonds and oil and stuff. Is there an issue there that's going to prolong it because people want control of these things?
Yeah, and I think that is often an element of these African conflicts. There is oil and gas in parts of the country. You're right to say there's diamonds there as well. And one of the leaders, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the RSF, is said to be a very rich man. I think from his endeavours in the diamond trade. I stand to be corrected, I think it's the diamond trade. But yes, so resources are a huge factor, and you often hear about the resource curse. Countries which are endowed with vast amounts of natural resources, be it oil, gas, etc., just aren't able to utilise them in a way that would increase prosperity and increase the standard of living in the country. And I think Sudan is another prime example of that.
Yeah, okay. Listen, Thomas, thanks very much for joining us this morning. I know we had a few more bits on the list, but maybe we'll come back to them another time. We do need to go to news shortly, so thanks again, Thomas, and we'll talk to you.
Thank you, Donal. Thank you very much.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, puck on. It's time to change. Test drive the award-winning range of Peugeot hybrids and fully electric vehicles at Slattery's Garage today. See slatterysgarage.ie.